Let me put it over here. It's me already does it, or for those who've been around, Rashid. I am. Okay, so you should be able to hear me clearly. Nothing wrong with that. So what I'm doing now, I think it's an error in the title, but I'm going to fix. Again, I'll start at 4 minutes always, so within 3 minutes I'll begin with the class. And I'm using my tablet right now, so that's why you see me from this angle. Again, when you're here, let me know the live chat, please. Thank you very much. Okay, I adjusted the title, which is good. Okay. Please let me know if you're bothered by the noise from outside, because there's some traffic outside, but I have the windows open so that air can circulate through the house. So let me know if you're bothered by the traffic noise. If you are, I'll close the door. So let me know. And anyway, when you're here, please hit the like button. Thank you very much. Suzanne is here. Les here also. Glad you're both here. Start at 4 minutes, so I'll start very soon. I can see the live chat over here, which is good also. Okay. Please, when you're here and you haven't done it yet, please hit the like button. Thank you very much. Glad you're here, Suzanne. Glad you're here, Les Brown. For those who haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. And if you want, consider becoming a member. That's on you. Put this over here a little bit. Okay, that works out well. Almost there. All right, class has begun. The title of this live stream is Ongoing Revolutions. And I put revolutions in quotation marks. Why? Because many countries today have this revolutionary myth they're teaching in public schools. So they're educating the public in this revolutionary history of their homeland. For example, the United States has this alleged American Revolution that they teach in their public schools over there. In South America, you have these Spanish American independence wars, in which Simon Bolivar and this other guy, I forgot what his name was, were seen as the two great liberators of South America. And so every country, especially post-colonial states, countries used to be colonies, they have a revolutionary myth that you put out there. Why is it a revolutionary myth? Because it's a story that's been agreed upon. Now, this does not mean that the story did not happen. Okay? It doesn't mean that part of the story ain't true. But the reason why it's a myth is because the story is used for a political purpose. And once a story is used for political purpose, they will never show the story as it really is. They will always give a twist to it in their favor. For example, let's say now that there's a village in the United States, maybe somewhere in Texas, and they're celebrating this local holiday every year. Then one day you ask, what is the holiday about? And they tell you, well, we've been celebrating this with the children, we don't know why. And it is a celebration in which someone dresses up like a pirate and they chase them out. Now, you do your research in the archives of the local university and you find out that this holiday was first celebrated in the 1850s. So you thought, okay, so it must be originated in the 1850s, but then you hear some other person know it originated from before. Then you find out this holiday, it was really something happened in the late 1700s, so the 18th century. That, because somewhere in the late 18th century, there were plantation owners who were kicked out of their plantations by revolting slaves. And they came back with some pirates to help them get the land back, but the pirates joined the slaves against them. There was an incident that happened. Now, later on, some enforcers came, some privateers, and they massacred the slaves of those plantations. Now, this massacre became a point of celebration, but they couldn't celebrate the event as it was. So the privateers, which were pirates for hire, in the later celebration, they celebrated like the pirates were kicked out from robbing the place. So there was an actual event that happened involving pirates being chased away. So that's the part of the celebration that's based on a historical event. But they don't tell you everything else around the historical event. They don't tell you that those pirates that were kicked off eventually had to flee because they couldn't massacre all the slaves over there. They won't tell you that. They will tell you, well, so many years ago, so many maybe decades ago, there were pirates that came to loot the place, but we, the proud Texans, chased them off. That becomes a revolutionary myth that they use for the public today to justify the current situation of Texas. So a revolutionary myth is when the politicians and also the public agree on a historical event that actually happened, but they refuse to explain the historical event for what it really is. They always give a twist to how they explain the historical event. The historical event happened, but the whole context is not shared with you. Now, there were actual revolutions that happened that led to improvement. A revolution is a swift change that wouldn't have happened without some intense effort. For example, if you have a neighborhood in Los Angeles, and in the 1960s, a lot of Chinese miners coming in, and over 40 years, there's many Chinese people living there. Is that a revolution? What do you think? Let me know in the live chat. Is it a revolution if within 40 years, a neighborhood is now predominantly Chinese, while before 40 years ago, there were no Chinese people living there? Is that a revolution? What do you think? Let me know in the live chat. I'll wait for a little minute more before I continue. Someone said no, what does the rest say? Is it a revolution if within 40 years the demographics of a place change? Well, it's not. Because a revolution is a swift change, not a gradual change. A gradual change is just a development. But let's say now that in 2020, you barely saw Chinese people in a big neighborhood in Los Angeles. And that was 2020. And now 2021, a year later, 60% of the population is Chinese. Wow, this is something that suddenly happened. Now you have a lot of people speaking Chinese to one another. All the Chinese restaurants over there. It happened very quickly, within just a year. That's a revolution, right over there, because there's this big change that happened that would have happened otherwise. So if in 2020, there were barely Chinese people living in that big neighborhood, and now 2021, there's 6% Chinese, go to 2022, now it's 80%. So from 0 Chinese people in 2020 to 80% Chinese people in 2022, within just 2 years, that's a revolution. Now, how come there's so many Chinese people over there? That's the question. Now, it can be that there was this big financial crash in China, and a lot of Chinese people decided to flee to the United States. That can be the case. But then, let's say it's 2040 right now. Let's say it's 2040, and maybe 30% of California is now Chinese. I'm just making something up. Let's say it's 2040, and over 30% of the state of California is now Chinese. Now, the children that are alive there by that time will want to know from their parents and grandparents, how come we are so many in California over here? And now there is this story of a mass migration towards Los Angeles, which did happen. But now they say California was going down backwards economically. California was still a rich state, but it was going backwards because a lot of people were leaving their jobs, which is true. And that we as Chinese people came and we rescued the economy of California. So we kept California standing. And with that, we have held the United States together. Now, is it true that that during the pandemic that happened of COVID, that during the pandemic happened that a lot of people left their jobs in California? Yeah, that may be true. Is it true that there may have been a mass migration of Chinese migrants to that place? That might be true too. And is it true that a lot of Chinese people opened businesses in the local economy of California? Yes. Does that mean that they were the ones that kept California together and they rescued California? No. I just gave you a fictional example of how revolutionary myths are established. Now, actual revolutions do happen, okay? But in this case, you had a small revolution that happened in some neighborhood in California. And this small revolution led to a long-term change over time, namely more Chinese people coming in. So that 30% of California became Chinese by 2040, for example, that's not a revolution. Something happened over 2 decades. So it's not a revolution. But that so many moved into one neighborhood was a revolution. So, but let's say now that in 2045, a lot of the people in California are fed up with so many Chinese people around. They say, man, 30% of the population is Chinese, they even speak Chinese to one another, and let me say now 60% of the economy is run by Chinese people overseas who never visit the United States. Now you had the revolution in between 2020 and 2022. And this revolution led to a long-term change. And now 2 decades later, people revolt against a long-term change. Now it's going to be another revolt happen. It's going to be a counter-revolution. So what I'm putting out here is that revolutions happen in the world. Some revolutions, like the Haitian Revolution, was a good thing because it led to the abolishment of slavery, which is good. You also had revolutions in Europe in 1848 that led to the development of labor rights so that employers couldn't just exploit you. So some revolutions were actually good things that happened for the betterment of mankind, absolutely. But a revolution, as already said, is a swift change, a large-scale swift change. What happened in past 2 years with this crisis worldwide can also lead to a revolution in how people relate to one another, in which we also are experiencing the side effects right now. What happened with Ukraine and all those millions of Ukrainians being spread all over Europe and also the United States is also a revolution, because out of the blue, suddenly you have so many Ukrainians all over the place. And again, it's going to have an effect, a long-term effect on the public, and the public may or fall against later on. So what you need to understand is that in human history, there are revolutions that happen, and later there are counter-revolutions against that revolution. That may have happened 20, 30 years ago. And then you have another revolution against counter-revolution. So it goes on and on and on. And here's what you need to understand. No worldling wants a revolution. Now, this may sound strange, but let me tell you why no worldling wants a revolution. Revolutions always force you to accept a new situation. But when you accept a new situation, it means that the old privileges and old comforts are gone. And with a new situation means there's going to be new conflicts, new challenges you need to face. But people are still used to the old situation in which they knew how to bypass the challenges of life. But now that you have a new situation, now they need to be raised again as adults. They were already raised as children. They don't want to be re-raised as adults now. But now they have no choice but to be re-raised as adults because there's a new situation you need to deal with. Example, if the state of California was to secede from the Union today and separate as the Republic of California, separate from the United States, that would be a revolution. But it also would mean that the people in California are not US citizens anymore. So all the tax benefits they had, well, they were still US citizens, are now gone. That means that people who have relatives in California don't need to apply for a visa to visit California. That means now that the tax revenue of the United States cannot rely anymore on the income from California. That means it's going to be a big crash in the tax income of the United States. So, for example, California is seceding from the Union, would be a revolution, and there will be maybe Californians rejoice. Yes, we're separate from the United States, we're our own nation now. But then there are challenges come with a new situation you also need to deal with. So here's the thing. Worldly people often talk about how wrong things are, or they often complain about the current situation. Whether it's the politics, or whether it's the economy, or whether it's the demographics, there are too many foreigners around here. They're always complaining. But when it really comes down to taking action to get things done, a lot of them run away. Because here's the thing. Worldlings don't mind campaigning and losing. Yes, they'll be disappointed when they lose, but hey, they can deal with disappointment. They're used to dealing with disappointment. By taking out on other people, or by going to drink or party, whatever. But what if they win? What will they do next? I'll give an example again. Let's say that there are people in Texas who are campaigning for Texas separating from the United States. And they've been campaigning for years. You want Texas to be separate. And then one day there's a referendum in Texas, and it's 53% yes. And the United States government ratifies it and says, okay, Texas, you're not a US state anymore. Now, do you think the campaigners for Texan independence will be happy? No, let me tell me what you think the response will be. Let me know in the live chat. I'll give you a minute to answer. What do you think their reaction would be if they finally hear the United States has let them go? Let me know in the live chat. How do you think they will respond? All right, let's run express an attitude right now. That's good. I'll wait just for 30 seconds, see if someone else answers too, and then I'm going to continue. So, that's right. When they hear you got your will has been validated. Your will was, we don't want anything to do with the United States. We want to separate. Okay, here's your will. You got it. We're not fighting you. We're not resisting. Your will has been established. You're independent now. So yes, they will be happy. Yes, we got what we want. But then realize, oh shit, we've won. How about foreign trade? How about passports? Now we need to make our own tax and passports. Now we need to have our own trade treaties with other countries. Now we need to have our own military. Oh, now we need to have our own border control. Now we can't. Now we need to have our own labor market, because before we got a lot of seasonal workers from Florida or from other U.S. states. Now we won't get them anymore because there's a border over there right now. Oh crap! Now we are not part of the powerful United States anymore. So now we need to negotiate with all those other countries, and a lot of them are not interested in us. So now we're going to realize, oh Lord, we got what we wanted. And now we have to do what we wanted. And then very soon, it's going to be obvious that the campaigners for tax independence don't know what they're doing. And then the public is going to be pissed off saying, because of you, we're in this situation right now. But then the tax campaign is going to say, hold on a minute, we've been campaigning for independence for years. Many of you voted against it, but many of you were also in favor of it. If you guys were against it, why didn't you fight more efforts in the United States then? We were just campaigning. We never expected to win, but now we've won. So yes, we are to blame for what we're doing, but hey, you guys knew that a potential outcome would be that now we're independent. So, and then the public has issues now. Because to rejoin the United States would be an humiliation for the people from Texas. They don't want to go to that humiliation. But to stay independent would also mean they have to deal with all the conflicts. They don't want either. So now they're stuck in a situation where there's no winning for them. What happens when the public's in a no-win situation? They will look for people to take it out upon. So now you're going to hear that in the independent Texas, there's genocide going on. And before you know it, Mexico needs to intervene. And Mexico says Texas used to be part of Mexico's, so we're going to take Texas back. Something like that. This is just it's a fictional example. I'm just telling you. A revolution is a revolution. Whether it's a good revolution or a bad one, doesn't matter. Revolution. However, the long-term ramification of revolution are other things the public don't want. They don't. So, the reason why revolutions happen to begin with is because the establishment failed. Now, what's the establishment? Establishment is whatever the public agreed to keep in place. For example, in the United States, there are states where they speak Spanish as a second language. Think about California, I believe Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, I believe also Nevada. Anyway, there's some states, also Florida, there are some states in the United States where they've agreed, though to the colonial history with Spain, in which Spanish was the spoken language, there's still a lot of people here with Spanish as a first language, so Spanish becomes the second language over here. There are also states in the United States, for example, in Illinois, well, I say it's French, Illinois, where they have French as an official second language. I believe also in Louisiana, but I have to check that out. maybe they changed it by now, but those are agreements. So if you are in Florida or California or Texas and you don't speak English, you speak Spanish, they should be able to help you out because in that state, Spanish is an official language. Now, if you would go to New York, that has almost no connection to Spanish colonial history, and there's never a Spanish establishment over there, they may say, no, sorry, you need to speak English. But if you're in Texas, they may say, okay, you speak Spanish, we have someone to help you out, because those are establishments. Now, an establishment can also be, for example, that they decide, can also be a racist thing. For example, we don't hire any Arabs, or we don't hire any colored people, or we don't hire any females, or whatever. So, an establishment is just an agreement the public has to avoid further conflict. For example, let me give an example. If there are many Chinese migrants in a city, and a lot of Chinese migrants bring crime with them, if this is mentioned, that this will make the Chinese migrants look bad, but here's the thing, the Chinese migrants, they have a big influence on the economy. So if you mention this about the Chinese migrants may decide, okay, we're leaving, but if they leave, the economy will suffer. So now, this is a tense situation, because the public is fed up with the Chinese to come there and bring their crime with them. But the Chinese are so rooted in the economy, if they would leave, they would have a financial crash. And nobody wants to do that either. So people decide, you know what? We will not mention Asian crime around here. Yes, there is a lot of Asian crime, we won't mention it, because the moment you mention it, you have to admit that it came with the Chinese migrants. And then the Chinese migrants' population will look bad, but if they look bad, our economy will suffer too. And then we need to face that we were neglected to our own economy, and they filled in the blind spot. So an establishment can also just be, we don't talk about certain things. Don't mention it, it's taboo. So when you have an establishment, the only way the establishment remains in place is when people are blackmailed to comply with it. So let's say you have an establishment in place that says we don't mention Asian crime coming from the Chinese migrant community. And let's say you have one guy on his podcast or talking about it. Then they can put sanctions on that man, limit his freedom of speech, or if they can't limit his freedom of speech, now they can try to bother him or gang stalk him just to make him shut up. Why? Because the people may claim we don't want to address this, because once we address this, we have to deal with the consequences of addressing it. So we just want to be left alone, so we don't mention the Asian crime around here. It can also be that in a community, there are many mass shooters. And people ask themselves, how come there are many mass shooters coming from this population over here? But here's the thing, if you ask the question, why are there so many mass shooters coming from this community, you already expose something wrong with the community. And once you do that, people have to face that something's wrong with the community. That already will make people upset. And then you think, oh, the mass shooters were severely abused as children. Wow, this will make the community look bad completely. This will lead to a loss of social trust and economic collapse. So people say, okay, there are a lot of mass shooters, but don't even mention mass shooters. So an establishment, a worldly establishment, let me say it better, a worldly establishment can only remain in place if the public is forced through blackmail to agree with it. And this blackmail often takes the form of blood sacrifice. So, when the blood sacrifice, when the scapegoating works, the establishment is rescued. But when the establishment fails in blackmailing the public, now you'll have a revolution. Let's say, for example, now that you have a city with a high Chinese migrant population, and since that migrant population increases, much more crime in the city. Let's say someone at the radio station admits this and talks about it. Now, eventually the public will wake up and realize, A lot of crimes are committed by Asians indeed. And a lot of them come from the Chinese migrant community. What's going to happen now? A lot of people are going to blame the Chinese migrants for all the crime. If though not all the crime comes from the Chinese migrants, people are going to blame them because the world is allowed to do this. Then all the Chinese migrants will be under attack, racist attacks. And they think, you know what? There's a lot of hatred against us, we're out of here. So they leave for their businesses and then you will have an economic crash. With an economic crash, you'll have inflation. The price will go up. And with the price going up, the public will think, F this, what is going on here? And before you know it, people will lose their jobs because the economy is crashing. And then before you know it, you have the whole city being overtaken by crime. And the whole city overtaken by crime, and you have those drug dealers fighting for control of the city, that's a revolution. Because less than a year ago, things were at ease. Yes, the word crime coming from the Asian migrant community, but it was still kept in check. People were bothered by the crime, but the situation was not addressed. But since the situation was addressed and people resisted to face the situation, now everything crashed, and now you have criminals running the whole place. So in this case, there was a bad situation that became worse. In the case of the Haitian Revolution, slavery was abolished there in the Caribbean, but Napoleon wanted to reinstall slavery. He sent over 50,000 French soldiers across the Atlantic to reinstall slavery. The Haitians revolted and shut it all down. And that pushed the world to abolish slavery later on. So, in this case, it was an oppressive situation. And because there was no way out of this conflict, there was a big revolt that happened that led to a better outcome. So a revolution can be for the worse or it can be for the better. But realize always, if it was a bad situation, getting worse is because the establishment failed to confront the bad situation. If it's a bad situation getting better, it's because the establishment failed to keep the oppression going. If it's a good situation getting worse, it's because the people failed to retain the goods they've established. So a revolution always signifies a failure of the establishment. So, why am I talking about revolutions here? It is for you to understand that as a believer, your breakthroughs are a revolution in itself. But Rashid, I'm just one individual. Doesn't matter. As a single individual believer, you have an impact on the community around you. So your breakthroughs are a revolution in itself. Please repeat this in the live chat for me. Your breakthroughs are a revolution in itself. All right? So if your breakthroughs are a revolution, that means your breakthroughs are destroying or harming the establishment. So whatever is established there by the politicians and the public, you are harming it with your breakthroughs. So that is why, whether you are a believer or unbeliever, but I'm addressing believers now, but even if you were an unbeliever, when you break through, you harm the establishment. Maybe you are from a poor part of town, maybe you're from the Bronx, for example. I'm just doing a fictional example. Maybe you're from the Bronx, a neighborhood in New York. And people already made plain the Bronx is a ghetto. There are only criminals and thugs coming from there. Only few people manage to go to university and have a full 9-to-5 job. And now you're from the Bronx and you become a millionaire by establishing your own business, by having contacts with Europe. You achieving that and doing that is going to make everyone look bad, both in the Bronx as well as in New York City, because everyone agreed nothing good comes from the Bronx, only a few decent people. And now not only are you decent, but you also are a big achiever from the Bronx. So everyone now has to change the way to look at the Bronx. And look at this. Because a lot of people were looking down on the Bronx barely received any funds for local projects. So a lot of people missed out on a sponsorship for the businesses and also for the community. So now that you broke through without any sponsorship from the community, it makes the community look bad. And many other neighborhoods that did receive funds in New York aren't doing better either. So you breaking through was a revolution in itself. And this revolution likely was not wanted. People say we never asked for you to be so healthy, safe, glad, joyful. Now our darkness and our neglect is exposed. F you, why couldn't you just be miserable like we are? This is how the public is likely to respond. Few people will be happy for you, but in general, the public will be upset with your breakthrough. So understand this. Every time you break through in life, you are causing disruption to the establishment. And the public will be upset with this disruption. And once they figure out the disruption is caused by your breakthrough, they will be upset with you. They will now revolt against your breakthrough. It's simple as that. So, as a believer, understand, you're causing a revolution. It's not a big revolution across the whole country, but even on a local level, it's a revolution. And realize people are not ready for that. And understand this. The world itself is in a cycle of revolution after revolution. The thing is, when something starts off as a revolution and it's not firmly worked out, it tends to repeat the revolutionary cycle. For example, you may have a country deciding, okay, for example, let's look at Colombia, for example. Colombia separated from the Spanish Empire in 1819. It was in September 1819 that it separated from the Spanish Empire, and in October 1819, the independence was not actually granted, but it was kind of indirectly accepted by the King of Spain. Now, from that point on, Colombia had civil war after civil war. So there was a civil war in which there was a portion of the population fighting to be freed from Spanish rule. Why? Because they wanted to keep slavery down there, and the King of Spain already made plain we're going to abolish slavery, and the slave trade below the equator is now forbidden. Okay? So because they wanted to keep slavery, they said, okay, then we leave the Spanish Empire. The Spanish king was saying, no, you won't. But eventually, the Spanish king said, okay, you got your country now. Once Colombia was established as a republic, now the people had to call themselves Colombians, which that's named after Semiramis. Colombia is another version of Semiramis. So Semiramis was the whore of Babylon, which was the mother and wife of Nimrod. And Semiramis is also used as the Holy Virgin Mary image in the Catholic Church. So Colombia is named after a female vampire from Babylon, the whore of Babylon. So Colombians would mean either the worshippers of the whore of Babylon or the children of the whore of Babylon. So the name Colombia itself is kind of an insult. But okay, now you have this country named after the whore of Babylon, called Colombia, okay? And now, they had to do everything on their own. When Colombia was still Spanish territory as a viceroyalty of New Granada, they were prosperous, they were prestigious. Once they became independent in 1820, a year afterwards, realized, man, we have to do everything on our own now. This is not going to work. Now the Colombians were complaining, we want Venezuela. The kingdom of Venezuela next to us needs to join us too. And eventually, in 1823, the last Spanish Captain General left Venezuela. Venezuela was conceded to the Republic of Colombia. Then, but also a year before, the city council of San Fernando de Quito in 1822 also agreed, let's join the Republic of Colombia. So Spain conceded that too. So Colombia was now a big portion of the north of South America. That country failed. It didn't even take, within less than a decade, the country fell apart. And then the new Colombia now is called New Granada, then a Grenadine Confederation, then the United States of Colombia, then just Colombia again. So Colombia went through revolution after revolution, revolt after revolt. Because here's the thing, their primary revolt was illegitimate because the King of Spain, Fernando VII, make plain we're going to abolish slavery together with Britain. The people around the people there will lose their minds. We don't want this. We want to keep the slaves over here. So they separated from the Spanish Empire. So their revolution, if you want to call it like that, was based on an illegitimate claim, namely the right to victimize Africans. So because their revolution was based on an illegitimacy, the whole country now becomes a manifestation of this illegitimacy. And all the people that live there who are not in agreement with this sudden change are now upset. And because of this sudden revolution, they're becoming independent with the name Colombia. That's why now the cities in the north had a leverage over the areas in the south. Because when Colombia was still part of the Spanish Empire, it was connected to Ecuador, Peru, so there was a floating economy. You know what I mean? The economy was circulating. But because Colombia was separate and they were cut off from other trade circulations, now the cities in the north, for example, Cartagena de Indias, Santa Fe de Bogota, Santa Marta, and those places, they remained wealthy, and all the other places in the south kind of became impoverished. And that development happened in the 1820s, very shortly after Colombian independence. That conflict goes on to this day. Yet a whole civil war since the 1960s with a Marxist movement in the south called the FARC, I believe it's gone now, against the cities in the north. And there was a peace treaty in 2018, I believe, but it's just a question if this peace treaty will last. So Colombia till this day suffers the harm of this illegitimate revolution happening in September and October 1819. So the revolution was based on illegitimacy, and now the illegitimacy keeps haunting the population over and over again. Similar with the United States. The United States separated from the British Empire, or better say, they were granted independence from the British Empire by the British Parliament, and now they made up this revolutionary story just to justify the new situation. The reason why the 12 colonies separated was because a lot of the slave owners didn't want to get along with Britain abolishing slavery throughout the British Empire. So they wanted to become their own countries called states, united in one coalition called the United States to preserve slavery. But now they had to make it appear better than it is. That's why in the United States today you hear about, our founding fathers were Christians, were believers in God, and they established country on biblical principles. There were no biblical principles used when they wrote the signed the Treaty of Independence. There was no biblical principle. There's such thing as a biblical principle because the Bible doesn't deal with principles; it deals with values. And there was no biblical value at all in any of the establishment documents of the United States. There were just a bunch of slave owners that insist on keeping slavery. So said, okay, then we separate as 12 different countries, united as one confederacy. So that is why the United States has civil unrest over and over again, because the foundation of the country is based on an illegitimate claim. Now, if the British people in North America were truly so oppressed as they claimed they were, then it would have a legitimate basis. But because there wasn't a legitimate basis, it can never work out well. And even if it had a legitimate basis, if it's done the wrong way, it will haunt them too. But now you know why the United States has those conflicts over and over again, left versus right. You have immigrants against those already there. It is because the foundation of that establishment called the United States was illegitimate from the start. By the way, back then, when the quote-unquote founding fathers I don't know why guys call them founding fathers. By the time the United States was established, most of the population didn't even want this independence. So, in this case, the American Revolution is a political fairy tale they teach the public so they believe that the United States is legitimate and has a right to exist and should be defended and is worthwhile. Because if you would figure out the real history of 1776 as it really is, you would realize, oh my God, what is this I'm living in? The thing is, the United States had a lot of funding, also from British bankers and from Dutch bankers, to keep this revolutionary hoax going. And the United States later also had Hollywood to keep this hoax in people's minds. Places like Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and those places, they didn't have that much funding to beautify this revolutionary hoax. So with them, the hoax was seen through quickly and the public became demotivated. And when people are demotivated in a place, they won't collaborate and cooperate that well. And that's why in Latin America, you have so much instability in their communities. Because nobody's really convinced by the revolutionary myths that they were taught. In the United States, people were convinced by the revolutionary myths, and there are even people outside the United States who were convinced by the revolutionary myths. So what kept the United States going is this revolutionary myth from 1776. If the 1776 is debunked openly, you wouldn't have any United States anymore. Because everyone would think, come on now, what is it we're living in? So, what you need to understand is that actual revolutions happened. You had labor revolutions happening in Australia I believe in the 1890s that led to Australian independence. Well, it was a good thing, Australian independence on one hand, but it was sabotaged on the other. But anyway, you also had the Asian Revolution, which I talked about before. You had the labor strikes in Europe, 1848, all over the continent, that led to the establishment of workers' rights. So revolutions for the better happened. But revolutions that worked out for the better, they barely mention them. Why? Because if you keep reminding people of revolutions that benefited mankind, they will look around and realize, wait a minute, there are more things that need to be improved around here. And those that are invested in establishment, which is a big portion of what we call society, don't want things to change. They want to remain the relief. So that's why the world has those revolutionary fairy tales that they tell you instead of the actual revolutions that are going on. So you have actual revolutions that happen that benefited us as a species. Then you have revolutions that never happened, but it only happened in a Hollywood studio or in a novel. You know what I mean? And those are the revolutionary fairy tales you put in textbooks in schools, just that children grow up thinking that the current political structure under is legitimate. The United States, till the Trump administration, was still able to succeed in convincing the masses of their quote-unquote legitimacy. Since the Trump administration, the legitimacy of the United States has been exposed to be non-existent. And that's why the United States goes through all of this. With Australia, it's a different situation. Because Australia, okay, there was a revolution in the 1890s when the British Parliament responded, okay, then Australia is independent. But Australia itself is not based on any revolutions. Australia was founded on neglect of British orphans that they deported there in penal colonies. That's true. So Australia has a traumatic origin, absolutely. But this traumatic origin is already visible in Australian society itself. Australians, that's the image they had in the world, were always seen as straightforward people who don't carve things up that quickly. That's the impression they had. For example, there was this Australian, I believe it was a teenager that joined ISIS because he hates on Australian people. And 60 Minutes Australia, this news program from Australia, interviewed the father of this one guy. Maybe he wasn't a teenager anymore, maybe he was already in his 20s, but since teenage years, he couldn't stand his own Australian people. They interviewed the father of this man who did it. And the man admitted that things weren't going well. I'm telling you, there were Europeans whose relatives joined ISIS and they don't want to even talk about it. But Australia, when such thing happened, they talked about it. Well, that was the image of Australia till 2020, and you know why. Now it seems like they've put some spell on the Australians that everything that's told to them, they don't even question. So the Australian situation is a bit different than the American situation, absolutely, because Australia is not based on a revolutionary hoax. Australia is based on actual inside job trauma by the British Empire that later included Aboriginals. That's it. So Australian history is far more stable than USA history, because USA history, for the biggest part, is fabricated out this revolutionary hoax from 1776. Australian history has an actual continuation of historical events that led how things are today. So in that case, Australia is more stable than the United States. Even though there's some who are trying to destroy Australia right now. And unfortunately, many Australians are cooperating with it, but we can pray for that, to reverse it, praise the Lord. And by the way, are there any folks from Australia over here? I know less from Australia. Are there any other Australians here in the live chat? Let me know, please. Thank you very much. So, anytime a revolutionary fairy tale fails, there's going to be outbreaks of domestic violence and social unrest in the place. So, this is important to understand. The United States will experience this a lot. And there will be more places in the world experiencing this, maybe even China. Oh yes, that's true, Les. I saw it. There was a voting that happened, and now there's going to be a new prime minister. Let's hope it's going to turn for the better down there in Australia. Because there's no way I would want to visit Australia under these circumstances, how it is right now. Absolutely not. The same with New Zealand, by the way, but that's clearing up already over there. Okay, Diane had a question over here. Diane asked, why is Colombia pagan if there was a revolt? What happened that they didn't replace evil with good? Was it economic hindrance? Okay, let me say it one more time. The name Colombia itself is pagan, meaning the whore of Babylon. So why would you name a country and whole population after the whore of Babylon? I'm sorry, but you're out of your mind for doing that. Okay? Nueva Granada, New Granada was a far better name. But anyway, Colombia they separated Colombia from the Spanish Empire because they wanted to keep slavery. That was the main motivation. So there was an illegitimate motive. They wanted to keep victimizing Africans, even though both the Spanish Empire and the British Empire were saying slavery is going to disappear. Deal with it. So that's why the country Colombia, since it started in October 1819, it had revolt after revolt, civil war after civil war, government takeover, because the basis is illegitimate. The base is white supremacist violence. That's what it is. Yes, I just said it. Colombia was founded on white supremacist violence. But they say, oh, it was Simon Bolivar who fought against the Spaniards. I'm sorry, but Simon Bolivar was a Spaniard born in America. It was a Criollo. Simon Bolivar married a woman from Spain, who died quickly. His ancestors were directly from Spain, namely from the Basque region, I believe. So this figure, Simon Bolivar, that's used to justify the current government, the current country Colombia, and also Venezuela, Ecuador, and all of that, that revolutionary myth never worked. And I won't go too much into Simon Bolivar right now because there are many inconsistencies with the quote-unquote history of this man, if he ever existed to begin with. So that's why Colombia is in the state it is. It's based on white supremacist violence, and it's a foundation they don't want to admit, and they've been using this Simon Bolivar to mask the white supremacist origin of Colombia. But now it's falling apart, and now Colombia has the chance to re-establish itself with a better foundation. Let's hope they do it. Let's hope they do it. The United States, however, doesn't even want to hear that their foundation was fraudulent. Don't even say that in the United States, because Homeland Security may come after you. You may even consider that terrorists will say something like this in the United States. People may ban you or put you on a blacklist because you say things like that. Because the whole United States is based on this founding myth from 1776. That never happened. So, as a believer, understand that many of the worldlings out there rely on revolutionary myths, not on actual historical revolutions that happened in our favor. No, they rely on revolutionary myths. So what do we do as believers about it? We acknowledge these revolutionary myths, we realize how deep-rooted they are, and we don't cast pearls before swine. We are not going to expose revolutionary myths when people just want to be left alone. If they just want to be left alone, let them be in their delusion. Because once they're out of delusion and they have to deal with reality and don't want to, they're going to scream around, shout, kick each other, domestic violence, homicides, going to get out of hand. People go to suicide, jump, to all kinds of great things because they have to deal with reality. So if they insist on the fairy tale, leave them alone with the fairy tale. But we as believers need to understand that the revolutionary myth is a revolutionary myth. It's not the actual history. Because if you are a believer and you are invested in a revolutionary myth, then you are part of the problem and you are sabotaging yourself. If you as a believer believe that Colombia, if you're a believer from Colombia and you believe that Colombia is a legitimate construct based on the fight for freedom, and you begin to pray for Colombia, then you are praying for your own downfall. Because the structure that we call the Republic of Colombia is based on white supremacist violence. So how are you going to pray to defend and sponsor something based on white supremacist violence? And think will work out well. It's not going to work. You're sabotaging yourself and those around you. You can pray for the population in Colombia that they become better off, but you don't pray for the white supremacist structure itself. If you're in the United States and you believe in that the United States was based on Christian principles, first of all, those things as a Christian principle, yet Christian values. But if you believe America was founded by believers that with biblical values, if you believe that, and because that you justify everything the United States government does, then, well, you are part of the propaganda and you're part of the reason why things don't improve. So, yes, if you're from the United States, you were born there, you can pray on behalf of the population over there, but you don't pray on behalf of the white supremacist establishment. And by the way, the Heavenly Father never endorsed republics. All throughout the Old and New Testament, it speaks about kingdoms and empires. The Heavenly Father never endorsed anything as a republic. So I don't know why people keep saying that the United States is blessed under God. On that, no, a republic can never be blessed because a republic has no leadership in its structure. A republic is a bunch of businessmen bitching with one another, and you have the president telling them, okay, calm down, this is what we're going to do. So that's how the United States began. It began as a bunch of slave owners come together in an assembly deciding we want to be separate from the British Empire so we can keep slavery, and all those 12 colonies will become 12 countries that we lead as an assembly. That's the United States. That's it right over there. Why would then father support something like that? He doesn't. Never did Heavenly Father support any republic. Even the pagans in ancient times eventually abolished the republic, and because it turned the Roman Republic to a Roman Empire, because they realized, man, this republic thing does not work. A republic just a bunch of business owners bitching one another in order to keep their financial economic grip on the population. And the population just gets along with being bossed around. And you have a president who has to make sure the business owners don't go too far in bossing people around. That's it. So there's no leadership and no mission in a republic. So a republic and a kingdom are two complete different things. A kingdom has a natural human leadership built in it. It also triggers the psychological need for belonging into the public. In a republic, you're always anxious because you don't know who the business owners are who are going to boss you around. So, if you're from the United States or you're from Colombia, from whatever country you are, before you pray for what's established over there, make sure that what's established there is something worth defending. All right? So, do not partake in the unfruitful works of darkness. So if there's a revolutionary hoax that the public holds onto, pretend to get along with it, but don't get along with it. Because it's evil. If there's an actual revolution that is inspirational, you can praise that one. Absolutely. You see too many believers from the United States endorsing this revolutionary myth of the United States, and because of that, they end up sabotage in life. Don't even let me talk about Brexit. Brexit is based on this colonial pride that of the British Empire, that they can almost do whatever they want without being challenged. And the problem is, since the 1950s, there is no British Empire anymore, and Britain became a union of 4 countries: Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland, and a few overseas territories here and there, and Britain has to get along with its neighbors in mainland Europe. So the whole idea that Britain was enslaved by the EU, and Britain had to fight this thing called Brexit to be free, it's based on nothing. And by the way, Britain is worse off now after leaving the EU than when they were part of the EU. When they were part of the EU, they could still co-decide on what the EU was doing. Now they can't decide, but they have to deal with the consequence of what the EU decides. Come on, you were part of a big organization in which you were one of the biggest members, and as one of the biggest members, you have something to say about the direction things will go. Now you're not part of the big organization anymore, but you still have to deal with what the organization decides. What would be better, be part of the organization and lead it in what benefits you, or to be out of it and to have to deal with what the organization decides? Anyway, Brexit is actually a symptom of how divided the British people are, and it's even a miracle they didn't end up in a civil war. It may be still, I don't know, but anyway, the future for Britain doesn't look that good. Or better said, Brexit is a revolution that never happened. And they can't build a mythology on it to justify the worst of situation Britain's in now. But anyway, this is the situation for the Britain has to deal with. I'm glad, dying, you didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance unto the Republic. Oh, Republic. So if you pledge allegiance to the Republic, you pledge allegiance to a bunch of business owners in Washington, D.C. that want to boss you around to get their ease. That's what you're doing. Because those business owners are only loyal to the demons they're serving and to their money, not to you. But yet, a lot of Americans see pledging allegiance to the Republic, not realizing that republics by themselves are not stable. Anyway, that's why as a believer, beware what you endorse and support. Because if you end up endorsing and supporting something that goes against the will of the Heavenly Father, you are sabotaging yourself and those around you. Don't do that. All right? Anyway, are there any more questions about this topic? Let me know. All right. All right. I didn't receive any questions over here. Thank you all for being here. Keep on growing in Christ. Be at peace, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.